And I remember trembling, shaking back and forth, swinging my body back and forth, and crying because I made 4 servings of guacamole and only 3 people could eat it.
Thrivers, welcome back to part 2 of the Quarter Life Lessons podcast. Today's topic is grief, and we have a special guest today, Katie Ashman, who is a licensed counselor in the state of Pennsylvania. And CharLea and I have just been talking with her about grief and how we all experience it, and we're going to continue that interview now. So, ladies, I would love it if we could each just share a major moment or season in our lives where we have each dealt with grief, and share that with our listeners so that they might get some resources or some ideas from those experiences.
I can share one of the most significant ones of losing my dad in 2013. He had been sick starting in 2012, and he died in 2013. So it was that experience of like knowing that he's unwell, taking care of him, and seeing him through, kind of. But it was, yeah, super significant. I'll never forget like going back to work about 3 weeks later and really like having the thought and this feeling of like loneliness, maybe, in terms of like everyone is just doing their thing, but I'm sitting here feeling so deeply sad and carrying this emotion, this deep emotion, this grief. I'm carrying it, and life goes on. It really does go on around you. It's almost like standing in the middle of like a crowded room or like a busy intersection. Everyone's walking, cars are going, and like I'm just standing there still, and like everything's spinning around me. I'll never forget that moment. That was the first grief and loss experience where I came to the realization of like, this isn't gonna leave me. Like, there's no finish line, no check boxes to make. It changed me. It changed how I view the world. It changed how I feel things. And I was like literally creating a new normal of life without my dad. And I think that's a big part of the grief and loss work that I bring to the people that I work with is like, how can we create a new normal? Like, this is just where can we kind of like hold space for this significant loss, but also carry on in this new reality that you have. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Katie. I think what you said, the vividness that you painted that picture with of the intersection and how everyone goes on, that resonates with me, with different losses, and that thought of creating a new normal, and then the grief of the person that you love being gone, but also that old life being gone as well. It's like a double whammy, and you don't, whether it's expected or not, because you said he was sick for a while. You probably didn't think that you were losing normalcy along with losing the human being, right? Like that is unexpected as well.
I was in denial, I think. Yeah, but definitely a life changer for me.
And giving yourself permission to start that new normal, that had to be a process too, right? Almost the letting go and the feeling of that loss and the permission to start again and accept the new normal. That was also a process, I'd imagine.
And it wasn't immediate. Like, it wasn't even in the raw kinds of grief in my journey. It was like kind of years down the road where I came to that realization. Somebody taught me that, I think. like just creating a new normal. That was down the road for me. So that speaks even more to how it's definitely a journey, and it like creeps up on you down the road when you least expect it. The grief of that.
And you said something about carrying it. I remember there being this journal recommendation I got one time, and it was for grief and loss. And I don't remember the author. And I bought it for my aunt when my uncle passed away unexpectedly. It was called How to Carry What Can't Be Fixed. And you mentioned it, and it reminded me of that thought because you really are never going to be the same. And you are carrying something, and you're a new version of yourself and a new life. And gosh, that's just so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
CharLea, what's an experience that shaped your understanding of grief?
Yeah, I can certainly understand the difference between a grief that you are expecting versus a grief that is just simply changed. So I think the first time I recognized that I was experiencing grief was after I graduated from undergrad. I moved to Texas for just a little bit, and I visited home for my mom's birthday, but the plane ride back was when I really got to reflect on being in my room without any of my furniture, being at my grandmother's house and that no longer be my address. And it flooded on the plane. I guess it was like a breakdown, like a very consistent, inconsolable, deep crying. And it's of nothing other than the version of me that left Texas as a recent grad no longer exists. That era of my life had ended. And that's the first time I think I was aware that I was experiencing grief at the same time that it had happened. Certainly, like we've stated on the podcast several times, last year when I lost my aunt, that was the closest person I've ever lost to me. And again, Katie, you're 100% right. There are things that will just never be the same. My aunt was a very involved aunt. So, I mean, there's a bittersweet moment at every single event because she would have never missed one. She would have never, not called on a birthday. She would have never sent a Valentine's Day text. Like, all these little things that maybe even were taken for granted. And, there is the guilt, again, that is associated with the negativities that come with interpersonal relationships. And just, feeling sorrow for any moment that wasn't a moment that I was proud of. Just having that hollow heart experience taught me not only am I strong enough to get through it, um, but it also taught me that, there are times when I have to just pause and let myself feel in the moment. I think the first gathering we had after we lost my aunt was the Super Bowl. And I remember trembling, shaking back and forth, swinging my body back and forth and crying because I made 4 servings of guacamole and only 3 people could eat it. And that was just such a profound, again, that hollow heart experience of this is a real, actual experience that has happened, and it really will never, ever be the same. And so I think when I stated earlier that disturbing, like it throws you off of your regular. And again, it is almost illogical. Like that does not on a regular day, that wouldn't make any sense. But it's certainly just the most human that I think I've ever felt was in little situations like those.
Oh my gosh, it's like the most human you've ever felt. Such a beautiful, like bittersweet, almost heartbreaking phrase. But I think there's a little bit of gratitude in there too, with some perspective because of so much love. I think it's Andrew Garfield, that actor who played Spider-Man, who said, grief is just what happens when love doesn't have anywhere to go anymore. It's like the absence. And he's such a sweet man on Sesame Street and all the shows that he's on. But that's such a profound statement, is that grief is what you're left with when you have so much love still to give, but that person's no longer right there, when you're talking about losing a person. Yeah, and I think to go through life without experiencing grief means you probably never let someone get close enough to you. So there's a downside, right? When we let people get close to us and shape our lives and experience each other in a superhuman way, then when they're gone or when that chapter closes, grief is going to be there, and it's like a bus ticket for having taken the trip on of the love or the experience. So thank you both for sharing that, related to people who meant a lot to you. And I wanted to share one that I didn't expect to have, and this is more about grief when you're Katie talked about it, I think, when you grieve a memory. And I think firsthand you think about your childhood, and there's probably some bad mixed in there with the good when you're thinking about it. But when you get older and you start to unpack some things from your childhood, in my case, I'll speak for me, in my case, you look back with new awareness for things that maybe you didn't understand when you were little. And there is a grief in that. And I think the duality of allowing yourself to hold on to the good and see the bad and grieve that it's not one or the other, um, is a really beautiful thing. And that's also, I think, part about being human, is that you can feel two or three or four things at once, and it doesn't have to ruin a memory completely. It's definitely not all or nothing. Uh, but I think when you give yourself permission to feel, in general, like we've been talking about, and especially when you give yourself permission to feel more than one thing, um, you get to keep the best parts of a memory, but also maybe the wisdom of learning how things could have gone differently, or how you want to show up differently. So I know that's different than losing a person, but since we talked so much about being able to grieve an experience or a version of yourself, I just wanted to share that one. Um, Without the duality of being able to feel multiple things at once, I think you could get really upset by losing an idealized sense of your childhood or an idealized sense of your life. And so for me, what I had to do as I was processing that was just center myself in gratitude that I'm the strong person that I am, and that I get to take care of me, and that I get to decide to hold on to the best parts of the things that shape me and learn from the bad parts. So, ladies, what tools or resources do you suggest people explore when they're facing any one of the types of grief that we mentioned on the show today?
I know of, or I've heard of, David Kessler, who is a world renowned grief expert. His website is grief.com, and he offers a lot of resources. And he has some podcasts that he's been on, which are super informative. I like to give that out as a resource. And I know of some local, you know, resources available here in Pittsburgh, but I'm sure reaching out in your neighborhood or your city, wherever you may be, I'm sure that I hope that there would be like a grief support group, organizations that support this. There is support out there. Yes.
Yeah, certainly locally, for Colorado, at least, Colorado Springs, palliative care and hospice care centers are generally where those groups are held, those specific grief groups. Um, you can find solace just in therapy in general. And I just want to take a second to normalize needing more support for something like grief, even if it's not uh, capital T trauma grief. this is usually uncharted territory, especially, once you get into adulthood. You could have lived your whole life and have all these unexpected feelings of grief and it be deeper, especially if it's never really been something that you've dealt with or has been difficult for you. So, as social beings, it's absolutely normal to need more support sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about this a lot on the podcast. Something that's really helped me is journaling. And I know there are some great Amazon or local bookstore journals related to the grieving process and creating the new normal for yourself. Certainly a trusted friend. But I would think for the listeners out there, just again, giving yourself permission to seek out these resources and maybe learn something about yourself and feel what you're feeling so that you can move forward in this process when you're facing grief.
Yeah, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but just for, public service announcement, if there is little to no recoil for an extended amount of time, I'm talking about a year, like you're going through this depth of sadness consistently with very little highs to these major lows, that is a telltale sign to reach out for some support.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, ladies, both so much. I think there's a lot to be learned from sharing our experiences with anything. It's certainly grief, and just appreciate your time. And Thrivers, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Quarter Life Lessons podcast.
As always, the conversation does not end here.
We want to know your thoughts on these topics. Join us on Instagram at Quarter Life Lessons Pod to share your perspectives and continue the conversation to thrive.
Thank you for tuning in to the Quarter Life Lessons podcast. Find new episodes on Spotify, YouTube, and our Buzzsprout website.